Sam world, I'm a shorter than average girl from down under, and I know that this video will be coming out late, so I apologize for everyone who's waiting on Friday at 9 a.m. to get this video. I've been trying out some new animations and adding in a bit more effort into my videos, so hopefully it all works out well and you guys won't mind this being a bit late. But basically today we'll be looking at the 7th book in Del Toro Quest Series 1, The Valley of the Lost. So this is it, the final gem. And you know what? Things ain't gonna get easier for our trio. They are now to stand off against the hardest villain in their tracks. And no, I'm not talking about the Guardian of the Diamond. I'm talking about themselves. This book puts the trio in positions where they need to confront the ugliest parts of humanity: pride, envy, greed, and hate. Now, I know you're thinking the 7 deadly sins. That's what I thought of when I first read it. And although hate isn't one of the classical Roman Catholic 7 deadly sins, pride, envy, and greed are specifically ones mentioned by the Guardian. We actually see more of the OG sins in the trio's adventures with Dane, Doom, and Nerida, as well as their fight against the Guardian. We also see other sins which aren't the traditional Roman Catholic ones, sins like vainglory or acedia. And so today we're going to be talking about all things sin. But if you're only here for the movie review, you can skip to the time shown on the screen or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. And for now, let's talk stories. So the trio are on their way to the Valley of the Lost, but they're extra cautious, traveling by night, avoiding public paths or bridges, and that's when they hear voices. Pirates. Specifically, the pirates that are giving Dane up to the Grey Guards. And luckily, their ship is moored in the river, whilst the pirates were waiting for the storm to pass. So the trio decide to try their luck, take the ship to their stop, and perhaps Dane is still on board. But the Polypan ain't having it. So as the trio are trying to fight the elements to get to the ship, the Polypan decides to blow the whole thing up and jump into the rowboat with them. And so, taken by the current, the trio plus Dane end up on the shores of Tora. Dane rushes into the city ahead of them, but when they enter through the enchanted gate, more like a tunnel, they find the city abandoned, and dozens of letters from the kings and queens of Del Tora ignoring the Torans' needs. And the great stone of fire cracked when the Torans broke their oath to King Endon. Dane was absolutely distraught with the news. He was weak, fainting, and not responding to them at all. So that's when they decide that they need to leave. Outside of the city, they meet Doom and Nerida, who had come to Tora looking for Dane. And so to prove that he's not an all, Doom walks through the tunnel entrance of Tora, which prevents any evil from getting through. Doom makes it out, but he's severely hurt. And before the calming effects of the magic wears off, Leaf takes advantage of Doom's lowered guard to ask him about his identity, which Doom doesn't like at all when he comes to. But he can appreciate Leaf's hustle. As repayment, Leaf tells Doom that they're actually heading to the Valley of the Lost, which Doom strongly advises against, claiming that it would bring them nothing but despair if they do. But the trio are adamant, so Doom gives his cap off to Jasmine so that she can hide her hair in it so that they won't identify them as the man, boy, and wild girl. And this is where the two parties part way. Dane deciding to go back with Doom to the Resistance, and Rita deciding to travel with the trio, 'cause she be wanting that. Yeah. The trio try their best to shake her off, but she keeps flirting with Barda. Because unlike the anime, Narita is a full-grown ass woman. And she literally makes it to them, to the Guardian's front door. And so using his powers to be able to control bodies, the Guardian makes the four dine with him, constantly talking about himself and his pets, which he cutely is named
Pride, envy, hate, and greed.
Yeah, real cute.
As the trio and Narita just like listening to him, they realize that the food that they're eating is like just ash. Yum. The Guardian then tells them that if they want the diamond, they gotta play a game. So he tells them the rules and the stakes of this game, and Rita decides that she doesn't want to do this anymore, which kind of disappointed the Guardian. And then he leads the trio to the really dusty library where the game will take place, telling them all they gotta do is guess his name and that the clues for it are hidden all around the house. But they have to find the first clue.
But you must find the first before you can go on. In a way, it's hidden, but in another way, it's as obvious as the tip of your nose.
To see the tip of your nose, you just have to look in a mirror.
Look, there's writing.
And after they correctly guess the name, then they can enter the room where the diamond was in a casket, which Leaf confirmed because the warm got hot when they got closer to the room. So clue after clue, the trio collect the letters which make up the Guardian's name, starting off with the O, then the D from a stained glass window puzzle, then the E, and finally the two N's from the carpet underneath the table, making the Guardian's name Endon. Multiple feelings rushed the three: confusion, distraught, anger, despair, but they knew that even if King Endon had turned bad, Ma strong-willed girl Shan would not have, and so they still had hope in finding the true heir. And so when they're going to get the diamond from the casket, that's when the Guardian walks in. At first, he tries to tease them about what they had just discovered, but when he realizes that they're showing little to no emotion, he just gets angry, telling them that only one other person had ever guessed his name, and that the reaction he got out of him is exactly what he wanted. Leaf knew that the person he was talking about was Doom. And so he starts getting angry with the fact that Doom didn't actually tell them all this information before they had come to the valley. And so the tension and anger between Leaf and the Guardian just grew and grew. But Leaf decided that he's not gonna leave. And the reason for that is, even though the diamond was in his hand, the belt wasn't warm. So he knew that the Guardian had cheated them, switched the real diamond from the belt of Tora with an ordinary one. But then the Guardian also felt cheated by the three. Yes, he had switched the gems and he had hidden the real diamond. But when he went to fetch it, he found that the fourth member of their group, who had refused to play, Narita, had actually just stolen the real diamond. But the issue is, Leaf has now just exposed his hand. He told the Guardian that somehow he knew that the gem in his hand wasn't the real diamond. And so the Guardian uses his power to grab Jasmine and take the cap off her head, and he realizes that these are the three that the Shadow Lord is looking for. And so again, he uses his powers to make Leaf take off the belt of Tora, but Leaf puts his hand on the lapis lazuli. And so when the Guardian comes to touch the belt, he wreathes in agony, and his pets turn against him, attacking him. That's when the Guardian turns to Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine and pleads with them to cut the cords which connected him to his pets via his chest. They help him do so, and in exchange, the Guardian tells them the location of Narita, the stream. When they get there, they find that Narita was dead. She had slipped on one of the rocks and cracked her head. Basically, the curse of the diamond being won honorably had come to pass. So they take the diamond out of Nereida's cold hands and add it to the belt of Tora. And that's when the curse on the Valley of the Lost gets lifted, revealing that the lost souls of the valley were actually the people of Tora, and the guardian wasn't King Endon, but a hermit called Fardeep, who is the previous owner of the Gamers Inn in Rithme. And Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine have now just made a whole bunch of allies, the entire Tauren tribe. Now, Doom wishes he had his hand on that many allies for the Resistance. But yeah, as I mentioned on Wednesday, the book has a more mature tone. Many of the action sequences that were in the anime are reduced to mere discussions in the book. Like in Tora, there were no Grey Guards, or the need for Doom and Nerida to enter the city. But Doom does it willingly, even though he knows how it's going to affect him, just for the sake of gaining the trust of the trio. With Nerida, Jasmine doesn't play all her cool tricks to shake her off. Instead, the trio just kind of abandon her while she's asleep. But even still, she manages to catch up to them. No need for a Awakis here. And speaking of Awakis, there is no Awakis in the book. So no Avatar level firebending, or boats on fire, or saving Nerida at the end. Also, another difference between the anime and the book is the Guardian is way more sadistic. Like when he's using his magic to force them to come into his palace and dine with him, the way that he wants to see their reaction to his boasting and his mind games, and his immediate switch to anger when they don't give him what he wants. Although I really enjoyed the additions made to the anime, all they do is delay the inevitable. Like, we don't see the Guardian's real nature till the very end, making his power more of the mind rather than magic. And then with Doom, the anime again makes us very suspicious of him, whereas in the book it's an act of honor where he puts his own pride aside for the sake of gaining the trio's trust once more. And so these tensions will continue in the anime. And then there's the whole Nerida's still alive bit, so she's probably gonna be back. And so will Awakis. Annoying. But that wouldn't be a problem if I were living in Tora. Because unlike the anime where Barda says, the magic of the city of Tora removes all negative things, including emotions. And so when the trio enter after Dane, they are conscious that they could have a particular emotion, which could be perceived as negative, but they don't actually feel it. And so this is the same reason why the Taurens didn't feel like tearing Endon's note would be considered breaking their oath to the king. The same reason why Doom is weakened when he enters the city. And why Dane... Sorry, cat caught my tongue there. Now, this intro to the book actually gives us an important setup. It introduces us, the audience, to the existence of positive and negative emotions, highlighting to us that the trio, or specifically Leaf, is aware of the presence of both inside of him. When exiting Tora, Leaf recognizes that his emotions and thoughts are changing. His disdain, suspicion, and apathy were creeping back. He also knew that he could use the Magic of Tora against Doom. When still under the influence, Leaf takes this opportunity to interrogate Doom about his past. And Doom reveals as much until he too regains all his thoughts and emotions and understands Leaf's tactics. For the Taurens who have lived within the magic for their entire life, they forgot about what negativity feels like. But that doesn't mean that it didn't exist within the city walls. The glory of the Tauren magic made them complacent, forgetting the other tribes and only focusing on themselves and their needs. They became proud, believing themselves to be superior through their magic, and so positive pride in their ability to assist the king and build a better Tora soured into negative pride within the city walls, resulting in the destruction in the thing that they valued the most, the Great Stone of Fire and the honor that came with that vow. And you see, the Shadow Lord knew this. As a magic user who was bested by the Torrens United magic when he first arrived on the shores of Tora, he knew the consequences of festering one's magic alone, and so ensured that the Torrens felt more and more isolated till their magic took care of the rest of it, thus explaining Xion's statement.
But with time we forgot about the other tribes. We began to believe mistakenly that the city was the result of our own hard work. We grew self-righteous, proud, and lost interest in what was happening outside our walls.
As for Fardeep, after having his livelihood, wealth, and status stripped away from him, he decided to leave his old life behind. But not really. You know that one person who says that they're over their past relationship, but is still stalking their ex on socials? Yeah, so that's basically Fardeep. He goes and hears news about what evil things are happening in the Gamers Inn, and as he does, he falls into a further negative state of mind. His thoughts become more vicious, becoming envious of the newfound success of the Gamers Inn, greedy for the long-lost wealth that he owned, and yearning for his wounded pride, but also at the same time believing that no one else can do games the way that he did, and also hating the fact that his beloved inn is now in the control of the Shadow Lord. And so that's when his worst enemy, the Shadow Lord, akumatizes him,
I am Hawkmoth,
giving him all that he seeks in the Valley of the Lost. And soon he makes him the keeper of the diamond, inspiring him to play tricks on people so that they would lose hope in defeating the Shadow Lord. Unlikely, both the Torrens and Fardeep were unaware of their negative emotions and how they are growing. For Fardeep, quite literally. And so both suffered the curse that these emotions bring indirectly. For the Torrens, their own magic when breaking the oath to the king, and for Fardeep, the curse of the diamond, which became the center of his muse. The only way is to become conscious of that negativity within us, and with the help of the lapis lazuli, of course, to sever that negativity so that it doesn't consume our entire being, leaving us to be lost, only leeching on the warmth of lives around us. Very subtle, Emily Rhoda. Very subtle. But that's not all the subtle hint that Emily Rodda trickles throughout. We also see Dane's despondence, Doom's melancholy, and Rita's lust for the diamond, each another of the deadly sins. Leaf himself battles his own wrath when confronting the Guardian after he guesses his name. Barda has to battle his disbelief, and Jasmine her ignorance. As for the Guardian himself, he represents vainglory. Now, for those who are familiar with the actual 7 deadly sins, some of these particular sins won't sound familiar. And that's because they aren't part of the classical Roman Catholic sins, which were canonized by Thomas Aquinas. You know, the famous Italian priest and philosopher. Some of the sins that were listed before are actually some of the pre-canonized sins from Christianity, or some of the sins from other religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikh, or Islam. But these 7 deadly sins actually feature more prominently in the Tora Quest universe than just part of a side character's design. 7 tribes, 7 gems, 7 guardians, and 7 deadly sins. as to not give too much away of next time's discussion when we talk about the return to Dell, we're only going to be identifying the 7 sins today and the gem guardian that it corresponds to. But first, I'm just going to show you pictures of all the devils and demons corresponding to the 7 sins. And let me know if you can match them up with any of the 7 guardians yourself. The power of imagery. Without even linking the dots, there are a few which just stand out as obvious from the get-go. Perhaps you even got them all already. But let's go through them together, shall we? Starting off with Del Tora's very own fallen angel, Fardeep. In Christian mythology, Lucifer was God's most beautiful and mighty creation, loved and revered by all. But it was his pride which made him disobey God by not bowing down to Adam and Eve, making him the first sinner and being dethroned from his status in paradise, turning him into a fallen angel. And so Lucifer festered in revenge, his pride only feeding his delusion of grandeur, rebelling against God and choosing freedom in hell over living in the service of God in heaven. Similarly, it was Fardeep's festering in negativity which turned him to darkness, believing now that he had the power to claim the glory and kingdom that he deserved in the Valley of the Lost. His taking of Endon's name is to fool all that Endon's fallen from grace. His obedience to the rule and forgetting the ways of Arden dethroned him, turning him into the hated man despised by all. But in truth, the Guardian was living a lie. The palace that he had, the food that he ate, and the things that he owned were all dust. And the trio could see that whenever they touched anything or tried to taste it. But the Guardian was blinded by his vain glory, boastfulness, which is a trait that Pope Gregory added to pride. And so the Guardian thought that he was living freely in paradise when he was actually the Shadow Lord's slave living in hell. And so the Guardian represents pride. Moving on to Beelzebub, the Lord of Flies and False Gods. And he also takes the cake of being Lucifer's second in command. But that doesn't really matter. What does is that he is the demon for gluttony, excessive consumption, and wastefulness. In fact, Islam's take of gluttony includes the sin of acedia, which was doom's sin, as the combination of excessiveness and wastefulness describes an individual who has lost appreciation for their life and the blessings they have in it. And so, which of the Guardians does this describe in the Del Tora Quest universe? The Glass. Yes, the mindless glass does nothing but eat whatever it can find, whilst the maze that it built deals with the waste. And if we were to believe that the story of little Ina is true, then all semblance of its self-respect and its emotions died with her, keeping the glass trapped in the maze for life in hopes of protecting little Ina. Belphegor, the demon which entices enterprises of wealth generation instead of doing the hard work to earn money. A very controversial incentive in the world of capitalism. But that's just the law for Belphegor. Although he is the demon for sloth, he uses greediness and selfishness to incentivize people to find schemes of making money quick, whilst basically sitting on their butts. And who does this resemble in the DQ universe? The Great Gallic, of course. His get-rich scheme is basically getting the Dread Gnomes to do everything for him in exchange of them cleaning him up and taking the gunk off his back. Bruh, in the real world, the Great Gallic would for sure be in the top 1% of the richest people. And now we get to Mammon.
Show me the money!
That's basically Mammon's deal. Material wealth and desire. It's not that deep. And which guardian is also not that deep? The Hive. Many hands and eyes to pick up every materialistic value that they can find. It's Leviathan. You guessed it, Rhea. Unlike the previous four, Leviathan isn't a fallen angel. He's a seraphim with the appearance of a giant sea serpent. Leviathan is super loyal, but super jealous of Lucifer, adoring him ever since he was young, just like Rhea and his relationship with the Shadow Lord. Leviathan also isn't sure about his status in Lucifer's eyes, and so he does everything to prove his worth, in constant doubt of himself and in need of reassurance, and perhaps being given one of the 7 possessions of the Princes of Hell, or being one of the 7 entrusted with a gem from the Belt of Tora, was part of that need of reassurance. All in all, there is definitely an emotional relationship between Lucifer and Leviathan, which Rhea believes he has with the Shadow Lord, naming himself his most beloved servant. Asmodeus, the Prince of Lust. Now, of course, in Christian theology, lust specifically refers to self-gratification outside the confines of marriage. But in Buddhism and Islam, it refers to general self-gratification attached to any worldly temptation. So any form of desire fulfillment without constraint is classified as lust. Which gets us to my good old Tegan, a sorceress which stops at nothing to get power. Running away from home, hurting her mom, giving birth to 13 kids, destroying the city of Dor, and cursing all the relics. I mean, tell me that's not a definition for lust for power. And last, and probably the least from my opinion, we have Garl, the representation of wrath. Which is really interesting because the mythological equivalent is considered to be the most prominent devil, Satan, beating Lucifer in strength but not taking the lead in the rebellion against God to pursue his own endeavors of misleading humanity. Unlike any of the other demons, Satan was never good and then turned bad because of his own sin. Instead, in dualistic theology, he is seen as the opposite of good, necessary to help God judge if a person is worthy of paradise. And so, like Satan, Garl never really changed in personality. He was flawed with rash action and anger, which led him to kill his brothers way before the Shadow Lord invasion of Tora. But then he justifies this action and continues to kill anyone standing in his way of his self-claimed lilies of life. His anger continued to grow over time as the lilies didn't open for him, but he continued to pursue his personal ambition without knowledge of the Shadow Lord or any of the other guardians. And so at the end, he didn't know he was being used by the Shadow Lord, and quite frankly, he didn't care. And so he represents the antithesis of all that is good, evil by nature. Now, that's a very quick summary of the Guardian story, so if you want to get the deets for any of the Guardians, I would suggest watching the video corresponding to the book that the Guardian appears in, and you can always just use the timestamps in those videos to just watch the bit of the Guardian instead of watching the full video, but it's up to you, of course. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll be getting into Series 1's finale, which is super exciting. But yeah, next time we'll be talking about all the tribes and how they will defeat evil. So make sure to stick around if you're keen for that. But just before I wrap up, let's go back to today's book, The Valley of the Lost. Love, love, love this book. I remember it being my favorite book when I was little because I loved doing the puzzles with the trios to try and figure out the Guardian's name. Yeah, I was that kind of kid who had no life and pulled out the paper and pen with Jasmine to get end done. In all honesty, I remember that I didn't get the D, but because it was 50-50 between S and D, Endon made more sense than Enson, so I just put the D there. Anyways, I think kids would love this book because of all the games in it, but even with everything else, the book is so fast-paced that nothing really feels dragged, even though some parts of the anime did. And I mean, if you're looking for any kind of violence disclaimers, the only things that I can think of is Narita's death, of course. But there's literally nothing in the book which called the trio to like pull out their swords, except for the Guardian at the end when he asks them to cut his tethers with his pets. So yeah, they were literally called upon to become violent, if you like. That's how tame this book is. So yeah. And that is the 7th book of Del Toro Quest Series 1, The Valley of the Lost. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our watches next week. It is the final stretch now. We've only got one book of Series 1 to go. So if you know any other Del Toro Quest fans, please make sure to share this with them so that we can all get on the hype train to this finale. And remember, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.